Welcome to the mood board on 99.94. Let's get in. All right, let's get this started. So obviously we had no actual cricket that was being played today, so we've had to improvise a little bit. But me and Charlie could do that, and Muku's, Mixed Master General also. So although Muku's already gone ahead of where we are, but we'll get to that in a minute. I just want to show you this tweet by Michael Appleton, who I think is something like, I don't know, some sort of important job for the New Zealand government working in Sri Lanka. But hilariously, also tweets about cricket a lot and loves stats. It's now officially the most washed out World Cup in World Cup history. Some of the early tournaments, certainly 1983, had reserve days. So I don't know how many of those were used, but off the top of my head, at least one of those was. But I think 75 might have had them as well, but I'm not sure. Also, the first ever World Cup, you may not be aware, was in 1973 and was actually the Women's World Cup. And the first day of that, there was a game between Jamaica and New Zealand, and no one turned up, and it was washed out. Not particularly the most well-promoted event of all time either. First one, and maybe not a great idea to start with Jamaica and New Zealand, if we're being honest. And then it rained, so it didn't matter. Maybe they were going to come, and it rained. Anyway, what me and Charlie have decided to do is just have a look at a couple of different things. One is a list of the 10 best performances so far in the World Cup. And the other one is the 10 biggest moments so far from this World Cup. There's a little bit of overlap, but not massively. So now we can start the show and we can go into the picture of Paul Sterling. So West Indies Ireland, Paul Sterling made 66 of 48. It was... At that stage, I think there was a lot of people around Irish cricket starting to be, maybe concerned is the wrong word, but starting to be a little bit interested in the fact that Ireland just wasn't kicking on the way that they were supposed to be. Gareth Delaney took 3 for 16 in that game with his leg spin. West Indies were 146, and then Sterling just played brilliantly, hit a bunch of early boundaries, put a lot of pressure on the West Indies. Then Balbirnie took over, but eventually it was Sterling who made 66 from 48, considering the pressure he was under. And his recent form, it certainly, I think, sneaks into our top 10. Although I will say that Marcus Stoinis is not in our top 10. He is on the other list for a different kind of reason. But either one of those innings could have gone in right at the end. Then we've got the Namibia versus Sri Lanka game with Jan Freiling. Made 44 off 28 after he'd already taken 2 for 26 earlier in the day. He took 2 for 26 later, didn't he? The 44 off 28 was essentially when Sri Lanka was completely on top in that game. It looked like there you could see him with his mouth really open, really excited. But Namibia were 95 for 6. David Visa had just gone out for a golden duck. And Jan Freilich came in, and he really hit the ball beautifully for Namibia, and ended up with 163 for 7. And then Freilich took a couple of wickets as well, and Sri Lanka bowled out for 108. It was a magnificent performance. Anyone who's followed Namibian cricket will know that it's the sort of thing that he's done quite a bit. The next one, and I'm trying to work out if Charlie cheated on this one. He probably did. But South Africa versus Bangladesh is the next one. Riley Rousseau, 109 from 56. They absolutely thrashed Bangladesh, did South Africa. Riley Rousseau kind of thrashed them on his own. He made more than half the runs of their total. And, they really did struggle towards the end of that innings. He was really the main part of it. Probably special mention here should go to Anrik Nortje, who took 4 for 15. But to be honest, that wasn't as important as Riley Rousseau's, as he was the one who really set that game up with the bat. Andy Balbirnie, 62 from 47 against England. I think now, looking back, that innings probably looks even better when you look at... Oh, there's Nortje. He did have Nortje separately. I take it all back, Charlie. You were one step ahead of me. Anyway, Balbirnie is the next one. So with Balbirnie's particular innings, as Muku catches up and realizes he's on the wrong slide, it was really what Balbirnie managed to do to the England seamers on a wicket that was favourable for English seam. I know Lorcan Tucker obviously did as well, did quite well, but Balbirnie just his innings completely stands out in that particular match. And again, a little bit like Sterling, there'd been questions of whether those two were, still able to be able to play those kinds of innings at the moment, the form they were in, and everything else. And I thought Balbirnie was magnificent. And if you've ever seen Andy Balbirnie in full, force, I'd say he probably batted better against West Indies. He just didn't bat for as long. But he's beautiful to watch when he's going. And it's a shame that we haven't seen more of that. But this was a great innings and obviously set up one of the best upsets in the tournament. Then we move on to Scotland versus the West Indies and Mark Watts 3 for 12. It's not just that he took 3 for 12. It's that West Indies were thrashed by Scotland in that game. George Munsey potted around for his 66, giving them 160, but it was really Watt who just completely ripped West Indies apart. He didn't let them score for a while, and then he ended up with wickets. Plus, he held that piece of paper, which is huge for all of us, because we all had fun with that for a little while. And the West Indies were bowled out for just 118. Just one of the other things that I think is really cool about Watt's bowling is you could see where he's delivering from. I think all 3 of his wickets were those long balls that he bowled. West Indies would have been well aware of that, and he tried it again for the rest of the tournament. It never happened, but in that particular game, they all came off. It's a really, really interesting tactic. I think you have to be very strong around the shoulder to be able to pull that off at international level. And there's a beautiful example of it. It's so ridiculously far back, isn't it? Completely legal, of course. As long as the umpire can see you deliver the ball, everything's fine. But I thought that was a really, really good performance. Mark Watt had a great tournament there. Sadly, didn't get a chance to go on into the second round because I think he's probably getting closer and closer to franchises picking him up. He's still quite young. And I think we're working out now that he's not your normal left-arm finger spin bowler. In fact, I've just done a podcast about Scottish cricket, and we talk a lot about how the fact that he's just not a left-arm finger spinner. Whatever he is it's a different Mark Watt hybrid. Scotland versus Ireland. Well, this is the game that Scotland should have won. Curtis Campher made 72 from 32 after taking 2 for 9 early in the game as well. Ireland were gone in this particular game. They were 61 for 4 in the 10th over, chasing 177. And Campher just came in with Dockrell and put on a 119-run unbeaten partnership to win the game. But it was really Campher who just destroyed Scotland in this particular innings. And Scottish bowlers had no answer to him. We've seen Campher win games from nowhere before, but it was a brilliant batting performance. Also, he went through different stages, which sounds weird when you think he made 72 off 32, but there were different stages. From early on, he was just swinging because they'd already lost the game. And then later, he got smarter and smarter with his hitting. It was brilliant to watch him do that. The most recent entrant on this list is Zimbabwe versus Pakistan and Sikandar Raza, who failed with the bat. He could probably... his innings against Ireland is probably another one that is unlucky not to be on this list. That was magnificent. There's a couple of good ones. The other Zimbabwean one, of course, could be from this particular game, which was Blessing Muzarambani going at 4.5 runs and over at Perth. And Tendai Chitara also did very well in one of the earlier games. I'm trying to think. It wasn't a West Indies game. It was one of the others. But Sikandar Raza, they were doing 130 runs. It was the Mr. Bean grudge game. And the opening bowlers really set this up. But it was these wickets at the end that really changed everything. So he took 2 and 2 balls, including Shadab. That's the one that started them actually getting in front in the game. Obviously, then gets Haydat next ball. This is pretty big. But then he's a little bit lucky here for this wicket with Shah Masood. Gets one wrong down the leg side, but what a beautiful stumping this is. Regis Chakabra just absolutely nails this ball going down the leg side. It's full. It's one of the harder ones to get when you're down the leg side. Quick hands, and Shah Masood doesn't even have a chance of getting back. Just beautiful wicket keeping there to be able to get that. So, Sikandar Raza, he's had a great tournament. He's probably, all things considered, I suppose, not far away from being the player of the tournament at the moment. He has played a lot more games against everyone else and in the lower level of competition, but he's been absolutely fantastic. and he's unlucky not to be on this list twice, but you can take that up with Charlie, not me. And then we've got New Zealand versus Australia. Devon Conway, 92 for 58, also took a couple of catches. Southey and Santner took the wickets, but realistically, again, this was set up by the batters, this particular win. The Devon Conway was brilliant. He included 7 fours and 2 sixes. And obviously it was Finn Allen, I'm trying to remember who it was, who opened with him, who started the pressure on Australia. But Conway really kept them in this for a long time. I thought it was a really, really top level innings. One of my favorite things was that he's not a particularly good player of leg spin, but he took down Zampa almost every time. And in the end, he faced, I think, 17, 18, maybe even 19 balls of Zampa, and just made Zampa irrelevant in that particular game. And, you know, that even though he's a left-hander, he's not particularly got a good matchup himself against that kind of bowling. That was a huge difference there. One of the reasons that, you know, and also it was against Australia. New Zealand weren't seemed to be, you know, well, they were underdogs going into that game, and I just thought it was a masterful innings, that particular knock. And we've so much of Devon Conway. When I first started following, you know, the analytics side of T20 cricket, he's just a name that just kept coming up over and over again. And to be able to see him, you know, sort of bring that algorithm to life, if you will, I think it's been masterful. So great work from him there. Then we have Pakistan versus India. You may remember that game. Obviously, the biggest game in the tournament, always going to be the biggest game in the tournament, and completely lived up to the hype. Kohli was just incredible, and he, you know, I'm sure this particular game will come up again later. But it is, you know, Pakistan had reduced them to 31 for 4 after 6.1 overs, and they were well behind the game. I think they needed 50 off 20 as well, and they ended up making 48 off the last 18 balls or whatever it was at the end. Just absolutely a brilliant innings. When you you know, you need to take into account the pitch, the opposition bowling, the position in the game. You know, all and I suppose just the fact that it's the most watched cricket game in the world, right? Absolutely, I think the best performance so far. So I think Sakana Raza's probably been the best player so far in this tournament, but Virat Kohli's not particularly far behind. And most of the other players haven't played many games if they've only been in the second round because of the rain. So there goes the first one. And this is a highlight I wanted to show later, but we'll show it now as well. We'll show it now. It's fine. It's a good shot. And I'll explain why in the next list as well. We'll get to the next list as well. So the next one is, so that first one was the great performances, but what I really wanted to have a look at was, you know, the best moments, I suppose, in this World Cup so far. And so if we start off with the, yeah, I tried to rate these. There's a few things where I've mentioned some games and the results, but I've also had a look at, you know, some individual shots. I couldn't really think of a particular wicket that got me, but there's, you know, a couple of innings, a couple of shots, and you know, one other moment there as well. But let's start with Marcus Stoinis. So obviously this could have been on the other list, but put it here at least in part because while it was a great knock, if you do remember, I think his first 3 boundaries were edges. I think one, it was semi-intentional at least, but probably went slightly finer than he meant. And then the other 2 were certainly, one was an inside edge, and one was an outside edge down the leg side. Sorry, an inside edge down the leg side, and then an outside edge past the keeper. But also, this was Australia kind of turning up at this World Cup. And there's a part of me, and because he smashed the ball so well after that point. But the reason it's not that much higher is, I don't know how much people know about time zones, but in Perth, the time zone is obviously quite late. And because of that, that means that most Australians probably didn't see this particular innings. I would say a vast majority of them were probably in bed or tired or half watching it at this point. So it was a very good moment because finally the home team brought up their first win, and Stoinis obviously did it brutally. But it's harder to push it any higher on this list if we're being honest. All right, let's go on to number 2. That's the Sky 6, and I haven't been able to get this shot out of my head since I saw it happened. I mean, it was only yesterday, but even so, Logan Van Beek, in fact, we've got a video, I think, of this one as well, but Logan Van Beek is going for the back heel Yorker, coming around the wicket, and he just gets this way wrong. It's too wide down the leg side, and it's also the wrong length. But I think one of two things usually happens here for most batters. They either swing hard and miss, or they just leave it, right? And the third option is the one that probably would be like a David Gower or Mark Waugh type flick, right? What I find really interesting from this shot is he almost twists his body around and almost plays a straight drive at it. It's like a pickup shot. But the other thing is, if you just, I don't know if I can do this. Let's see if I just want to show you something really cool here. I'm going to show you, see if I can control this. Muku's now annoyed that I'm taking control of this. But there's a really interesting thing about where this ball is. And I've completely got the wrong highlight. Watch this. Sorry, everyone. All right, this is what I want to show. So this ball, it gets a little bit closer to him when it actually pitches. I think that's just out of the hand. But when he makes contact with this, his head is, I'm going to say 70 to 80 centimeters at least out of the line of the ball. So he's hitting this ball on his weak side, so on his leg side. And by weak side, I mean like from an eyesight perspective, because of the way he's standing. And it's a meter away from where his head is when he actually makes contact with the ball. To be able to do that and then still make the kind of contact from the kind of shot that he does is just absolutely remarkable. And yeah, so I just wanted to, I've just been thinking about this shot over and over again. This shot is just not normal at all. It really is. It's one of my favorite individual shots from this World Cup. But there's another one that I think is really cool as well, and that's the Junaid Siddiqui 6 from the UAE. They obviously, the UAE lit up this tournament with their, I've written beautiful sunset strips. They're not called sunset, are they? They're beautiful winter strips, they call them. But this particular shot from Siddiqui was, I think it was in one of their second game. Who were they playing here? Yeah, so Sri Lanka. Look at the connection on that. This is a UAE tail ender, right? And have a look at the length of this hit. So it goes up on the roof, and it is 109 meters. It is just a beautiful hit from a tail ender there. And he does a little pose and gives it the arms and everything else. He'd actually bowled a really good spell and almost won that game against the Dutch with reverse swing. But he's going to get remembered for the muscle pose or there it is, of just that beautiful strike, but just absolutely great. And it was good that UAE got a win at the end. But also this particular shot went viral. And let's be honest, you know, UAE cricket over the last couple of years has had its issues and they're not going viral that often. So anything that helps them, on top of, I'm assuming, a lot of sales for those shirts, is huge. Our next moment is Curtis Campher. I won't talk about this too much because obviously we did mention it in the performances. But from just a pure perspective, you know, we talked about the innings a little bit more. Ireland were gone when Campher was batting, right? They were literally three-quarters of the way through that game. They'd already lost the first game to Zimbabwe. They were pretty much, I mean, I don't know what the staff were doing, but they were probably packing up stuff and getting ready to head on the plane and go back. It was really, really bad. And Campher came in and played just an absolutely incredible inning. And it is the second time we have seen him win a World Cup game for Ireland on his own. And he's a young player and he hasn't played that much. I just thought it was absolutely great. And he's a sort of player that tries really hard. You know, he's just one of those all in, you know, sort of player. So to see him do so well, I think it's a great moment. But that particular innings, I mean, go back and have a look at it. He really does start by slogging wildly. And then by the end, he's playing 5D chess with the Scottish players. But let's move on to Scotland versus West Indies. I think this is, I think I'm trying to think of the best way of putting this. It's not so much that this was an upset, because I think a lot of us who had done the research were thinking that the West Indies were a particularly strong team and that there was certainly a chance that they might not qualify from this particular group. That said, there's a big difference between that and what bookmakers and what casual fans thought, and also Scotland beating them in the first game. No one actually knew what that was, but it's a huge step up for Scottish cricket. They didn't qualify for the next round as they did last time, but they were in a much stronger group this time than they were in the last one. If you do want to listen, there's a really good podcast I did on Scottish cricket that just came out on Red Inca today, being the podcast feeds. We'll put it up on YouTube very shortly as well. But I just think for them being able to beat a team like the West Indies, that's the sort of thing that gets headlines back in Scotland. It gets casual fans talking about it. West Indies cricket is just a bigger entity when it comes to casual fans than Bangladesh was, who they beat in the last World Cup. But more important than that, it's 2 World Cups in a row where they have beaten test-playing nations. And I think for Scotland, that is absolutely massive. And again, because this game came so early on, it was just a huge moment in the tournament. Although I suppose we've had so many on now. Back a little. The Ireland upset. I've got this one just a little bit ahead of Scotland's win over the West Indies, based on the fact that even though Ireland are a test-playing nation and they've had a lot more success than Scotland over the last 15 years, not traditionally as much, but because England were the favourites for this tournament, briefly, but I think after Australia lost to New Zealand, England went to unanimous favourites for a little while, and then I think when India beat Pakistan, they went to favourites. But people thought England were going to win this tournament. Thought they were a very good chance of winning this tournament, and for Ireland to beat them. And obviously it was rain assisted, and Ireland probably got the better of the conditions. But Ireland went up against a team who has spent more time planning for white ball cricket than any other international team ever has. And Ireland outthought them, right? Completely. This wasn't a fluke situation or one player having a day. They outbatted them, and then they outbowled them. And it was absolutely massive. And I think, I think it deserves a lot of respect, this particular win. And I thought it was a brilliant moment for Irish cricket. But since we're doing upsets, and let's be honest, there's probably going to be another upset before we finish here. I mean, it's the Underdogs World Cup. What do you want from me? There's a lot of great upsets to get through here. I think, I can put Sam Curran's fifer against Afghanistan on this list, or we can say that Namibia beating Sri Lanka in the first day of this tournament, which now seems like about 400 days ago, if we're being really honest, was absolutely incredible. I don't know if you remember how it felt back then before the World Cup became a water sport, but I think even for people like me who knew a lot about Namibian cricket, and people who follow them, that just seemed like a huge step up for them. They were in the last tournament, beating the Asia Cup winners in the first game of the World Cup. I think that's something that, even though they haven't gone through the second round, a little bit like Scotland, they're going to be a little bit conflicted about their World Cup, but they should be keeping this victory for a long time in their memories. This is hopefully the thing that we know. There's a brilliant small community of Namibian cricket. We really want that to get a little bit larger and to explode a little bit more, because there's clearly talent in that country. There's clearly a passion for cricket there, even if it isn't in a small part. And I've actually done a different podcast today on Namibian cricket, so Double Century, the podcast, but you can listen to that there, about the history of Namibia. All right, let's pause the upsets for a little while. The last over of India-Pakistan. I mean, I'm probably eventually going to have to do like a 19-part series on this particular over, and I am pretty obsessed with it, if I'm being honest. I'm not sure I've actually fully recovered from it. I remember when we had the Nikesh from India on 99.94 was doing the live for the Twitter Spaces, sorry. And he was just calmly going through the facts, and he brought me on. I was like, I can't believe anyone can calmly go through the facts after watching that last over. Anyway, let me try and remember what happened in it. A spinner was bowling, but then he decided to bowl medium pace, I think, or at least fast spin, and the keeper went back, but didn't go back that far, and sort of started standing in under 12's position. Then, because the spinner was bowling medium pace, he kept bowling full tosses. The second full toss was called a no ball. Murray Erasmus then had to counsel Baba Azam. India left 2 wides in the over. There was a bowled off a free hit that went for the least deserved 3 byes that any wicketkeeper's ever had against them. There was a stumping in there at some stage. Virat lost strike, and Ashwin hit that drive off the last ball. It was just a brilliant over of cricket. And this is what I said at the time. It's one of those games, if 100 million people weren't watching it, and it was just, I don't know, a BPL game in the middle of the season, or, some random smaller competition, and you happen to turn the TV on, you'd still would have felt incredibly into it, because it was just so much story happening from ball to ball and so much different action. I think this was my favorite sort of visceral, personal reaction to it. I think the other two things are a little bit different. But for me, this is it was just a brilliant over of cricket, but it was also a stupid over of cricket. It was so perfect in that way. All right, let's get on to Virat 6, which we showed you before by accident, but we'll show it again. I'm still not sure I'm really ready to be able to sum up how good a shot this was. When you factor in the bowler, the delivery, the ground, the pitch, the game situation, Virat's T20 form, to pull off a shot like this at that time is absolutely crazy. As I said, if you were pulling this shot off, in fact, let me just pause there because I want to go right back to the start for a second. I'm not very good with these pauses, am I? If you were to pull this shot off, right, in a club game against some guy who's come late to the game because he had to drop his kids off at, I don't know, cello practice or something, it would be incredible. Because the actual physics of it don't make sense, because he has to, if he's falling away, right? And you can see that he just right here loses his balance a little bit. Then it's a ball that is really in a position to be flat batted, right? But he hasn't given himself enough room to flat bat it. So his best option is going to be probably hitting it over wide mid-on, mid-wicket, maybe even square leg. But he realizes that the boundary is slightly different at the slightly shorter, right? So he ends up playing what is a very, I don't know the best way of putting it. It's like a near straight bat shot. It's not quite a straight bat, to be fair, but it's like a back foot drive / punch, but over the top. Look at that. That's not that much different to the sort of shot that someone like Shai Hope plays, those sort of straight back foot drives that he plays. This is just not a normal shot. It's absolutely something that we just don't see. And for him to pull it out at that moment with all the other context on it, and I will do a deeper dive into this, I'm sure, at one stage, especially if we get more washouts. But I just thought it was one of the more magnificent moments that you will see of cricket. Just absolutely outstanding. But it's not number one, because number one, I think, has to go to a combination of Zimbabwe winning and obviously the Pakistan Mr. Bean, Pak Bean, as he calls himself. Look, I mean, let's be honest. Before this game started, this moment where one random Zimbabwe fan was angry about something that happened in the 2016 Harare Agricultural Show, where a man was sent over who was a Pakistan Mr. Bean impersonator, but apparently didn't tell. I don't even want to know the full story at this point because it's all so crazy. But this was the narrative, was one random tweet back to the Pakistan Twitter account. And from that, it sort of got out of control. But part of that reason was no one thought this game was going to be anything, right? I mean, even when Zimbabwe batted, once Sikandar Raza went out, you were like, wow, I can't see how they're going to get enough runs. They end up on, 130 odd, whatever it was. It's certainly not enough runs to put that pressure on what you would think, with the top order of Babar Azam and Mohammad Rizwan. You're not particularly worried. Now, yes, the Zimbabwe bowlers are genetically engineered in a lab to be, quite good at Perth, specifically blessing Muzarambani. But even then, there's enough batting down the order. Even if you say Pakistan's middle order is shaky, that's if they're chasing 150, 160, 170, 180. 130, it's not quite the same, is it? And even after Shad Khan goes out, so they needed, about 42 off 39 when he went out. And obviously there were 3 wickets not long after that. But even after he went out, and then again after Shan Masood goes out, you're still thinking Pakistan are probably going to find a way. I mean, Muhammad Wasim couldn't hit the ball, but wasn't out of the realms of possibility that he was going to get a couple of top edges for 4 or 6 by the way he was swinging, right? And Muhammad Nawaz wasn't getting the balls away the way that he would have liked to either. But again, you do sort of feel at a certain point that this is going to happen. And then it just never happened. And right at this moment here, and fumble, thought Pakistan were going to win it, right? At that point, even with that last fumble from the wicketkeeper, of course, who had just taken that incredible stumping of Shan Masood, and now when he has to take this fairly simple take, messes it up. But again, this sort of sums it all up. That's very easy for that to go horribly wrong. But he showed composure, he stayed on top of it, and he did right. And if you have a look at Zimbabwe in that entire game, it's kind of what they did. Their first innings was the fumble, right? And then the second innings is essentially wait a minute, I've got to get this done. I pick it up and I run it out. Just an absolute, for me, with the history of Zimbabwe cricket, with everything we've seen with this team over the last 20 odd years now, almost everything from 99 World Cup. They've had little flare-ups, of course, and they've had some success at different times. But it does feel like to me that this was absolutely the moment of our World Cup so far. And you could have also slipped in the other Zimbabwe game where they made it, to this tournament as well. That was a huge win. But I think this was the absolute moment. And for all those Zimbabwe cricket fans who, a lot of which have just, in my conversations with them, they've just been angry and frustrated and disappointed for such a long time. And I think a lot of them probably have dropped off. 2016 was the last time they were in a World Cup. I think I said incorrectly yesterday that they made the second round. They didn't make the second round. Thanks to the man on my Discord channel for reminding me of that. Raylan Crowther, although that's probably not his real name, is it? But yeah, I just think it was an absolutely massive moment for Zimbabwean cricket. And what I did find, going through all this, is that both of these lists are already quite amazing. The performance is one, maybe not absolutely game-changing, but to have this many great moments in a World Cup already, and we're not halfway through, although... Are we halfway through? There's a lot of games to go. I'm looking at my board. There's a lot of games left to go. And we don't know what is going to happen if it ever stops raining. But I personally can't wait to see what happens next in this World Cup. All right, well, that's the end of the scheduled show. Afterwards, I will take your questions and we'll do some of that. But first, we're just going to play an ad while I have a quick read through and see what is in the comments.
If you love the language of cricket and want more, then head over to the 99.94 app and you can hear all of our podcasts and cricket commentary. We're adding new shows all the time and covering cricket series from all over the world. Be the first to hear all of our announcements by following us on social media at 9994DM. Welcome to Cricket's Conversation.
All right, let's have a look what we've got here. C Square says, I feel like this Rain team might just be able to beat the other teams by a long mile, already at 8 points. Did we give Rain all the points? That's the reason I picked this question. I've been thinking about it quite a lot. Do they get half a point or do they get the full points? Because if they get the full points, they're kind of unassailable at a certain point, are they not? It's a bit like when Extras was the third leading scorer for England in 2021. It's one of those magic things that we're all really excited about. But let's hope that Rain qualifies for the finals, but then has a really bad game. What else we got here? Vishweet says, why are there not 2 different venues on the same day? Well, there have been. Obviously, when we had the 3 games the other day, we had 2 different venues. So the reason they don't do it is twofold. First is it's cheaper. That's the truth. The second one is that they believe, especially for the neutral games, that they're more likely, if they have 2 games on that day, to get a bigger crowd overall. You almost make it like a carnival of cricket. I think Sri Lanka kind of made fun of that in the early games when you could see they were playing the early afternoon game, and then the fans were just leaving for the night games. But that was, I believe, the one of the thinking behind it. Having said that, I would have assumed that money is the major reason that we're doing it in that way. What else we got here? Vengeance says, why can't we have covered stadiums? We have a covered stadium in Australia. We can't have covered stadiums because there's probably not enough cricket grounds in the world that play enough major cricket in order to be able to fund what is a very, very expensive endeavour. So the reason there is a covered stadium in Melbourne, Docklands Arena, is really through football more than cricket. I mean, it's almost nothing to do with cricket. They just host a big bash, and they've hosted a couple of internationals, of course, over their time as well. But yeah, that wasn't funded through cricket. Lords have looked at doing it. Some of the smaller English county places have done it. It's really expensive, although it is getting cheaper the further we go. And there are other options rather than just putting the big roof on like you have at Docklands. There's certainly other ways that it could be done. But yeah, it's the individual grounds don't make enough money for it to make it worthwhile. And then you would have to play the majority of the cricket in that place. And that's going to take cricket away from all the other areas that they want to play cricket in. So until they can find a cheap enough option where they can have multiple roofs, or even, I don't know if this is ever going to be possible, but like a temporary roof, with a bunch of drones holding a roof up or something silly like that. I don't think there's going to be... Lords is the only one that I think probably has the funding to be able to do it, but Lords could build a roof. I don't know if they can with all the... I've never looked into all that sort of stuff, but they could afford to build a roof. Is probably the best way of putting it. All right, what else have we got here? Harsh says, World Cup has brought back respect for anchors, normally ignored in most franchise tournaments. Technical batsmen excelling. Yeah, so I mean, it has. I'm sure it's brought back respect for them because the next tournament will be played on flat pitches and it won't matter again. And it's not, I don't think it's going to change the way that T20 cricket is going away from anchors. I think it's shown that in a tournament environment, because you are so dependent on the conditions, we saw that in the UAE in a completely different way, that you probably need to have that ability to be flexible. So Steve Smith, quite clearly not in Australia's best 11 T20 players at the moment. In this particular tournament, he probably is. And, he might be able to say the same with Cam Williamson as well. So I think from that perspective, it's been a very interesting tournament from that. It's... I wouldn't say that this has brought them back into fashion. Put it this way. I don't know, if we had a tournament in the West Indies and half the games were in Guyana and you had a bunch of spinners darting it in and the ball rolling along the ground, that suddenly wouldn't be, favourable everywhere. But, you get your day because of the way that these tournaments go ahead. Dimitri DeGraff says, I remember seeing in your Tim Payne video that Regis Chakavra was by far the best wicketkeeper in run save metric. How accurate is that? So I think that was the CricViz metric. Look, it's a very flawed metric. I think they're doing a very good job with it, but I mean, you kind of have to take... The biggest problem is that you, me, Dimitri, and I don't know, Seamus, are all see the same thing, and we're going to see it differently. And I always go back to the MS Dhoni thing. If MS Dhoni didn't die for chances, and quite often weren't marked against him as a negative, whereas another player would die for everything and gets marked as a negative. So Ben Foakes has a worse catching percentage than some other wicketkeepers out there that aren't as good wicketkeepers as him. One of the reasons he has that percentage is he gets his hand on so many extra balls because he has better footwork than other wicketkeepers. Eventually, what we need to be able to do is have some form of spatial tracking, where we can essentially say, okay, so that ball was edged from this position at this speed, and you would expect wicketkeepers to get that 70% of the time. This wicketkeeper didn't move, and this other wicketkeeper got there and dropped it, but actually saved 3 runs. So I do think in that way we can get there, but I'm not sure. I feel in the last couple of World Cups we've had some form of spatial tracking at the grounds, but it might be very an amateur version of spatial tracking. But all these clearly there's something going on the ground with all their computer graphics, computer game type graphics they've been using over the last couple of tournaments. But I haven't been at either of those tournaments, so usually I just go up and ask someone, but I'm not exactly sure what they've been able to do so far. Oops. Success Value said, you were saying the Pakistan team is predictable. Yeah, by predictable, what I mean is that they are a team who has a very a low variance on their average innings. So I'm talking about their batting. Obviously, it didn't work against Zimbabwe, but you're not looking at probably a lot of games where they're going to score 210, 220, 230, 240, unless the conditions completely dictate that. And you also shouldn't see them bowled out for, 80, 90, 100, 110 that often either, because they have that, their top order bat slow but bat long, which means that they're giving themselves a very what's the best way of putting it? A very regular sort of total. And that means that they're very easy to game plan against, but also that they're always keeping themselves in for what is probably their stronger side, which is wicket taking and bowling. And so that's kind of the team that they are. And we with that in mind, there's an argument that having the best bowling lineup in a white ball tournament and having consistent batting is probably better than having the best batting and a consistent bowling lineup, if that makes sense. So it's a little bit that's how it should work. But in T20 cricket, I think it does. If your bowlers if you get two of them that get caught, I still think you can end up with a total that goes beyond what your batters can score. So I'm not a huge fan of it. I think you should try and maximize your batting and your bowling. And I don't think that's necessarily what Pakistan has been doing. To be fair, that had nothing to do with them losing yesterday. That was a completely different kind of situation. Seaman says, what chance do you think we have of both Ireland and Zimbabwe making it to the semis? Well, Ireland, probably with that washout, they probably needed the points against Afghanistan, I would have thought, to be able to get through. And Afghanistan would say the same thing. Zimbabwe, I'd be very surprised if they continued to get through. I don't have the points table in front of me, sorry, Seamus, but it's low. I think Ireland have a 15% chance of qualifying for the semis as it currently stands, and I haven't seen Zimbabwe's. That was from Freddie Wild at CricViz. So, 15%, that's better than nothing. What else we got? Harsha says, why did you miss KDK versus Zimbabwe? Because it wasn't a game. The game wasn't finished. Yeah, it was beautiful hitting, don't get me wrong. But it wasn't a full game. And, it was what it was. Let's see what else we've got in the questions. This is interesting. I was at the Mohali innings. I think for skill and improvisation and control of the game, you can't compare that to what happened in the Pakistan innings, right? That innings in Mohali was great. The 133 in Sri Lanka is obviously a slightly different, format and everything else, and a different kind of game. But the 80 in Mohali, I think it's almost the most in control I've ever seen anyone play. And I'd seen the Joe Root one against South Africa not long before that. Both of those innings, I just thought was incredible. That stage, I really thought that people like Joe Root and Kane Williamson and Steve Smith and Virat Kohli would dominate T20 cricket. It's interesting how quickly it changed. In fact, if you look at that Mohali innings, I think India's next game was against West Indies and Andre Russell, which really probably showed us more of the future there. So it depends on what you're looking for. If you're saying which was the better innings, it's probably the one versus Australia because he was completely in control. And if you're looking for the one with the greater degree of difficulty, I would say the Pakistan innings. He's older, he's not as in form, the pitch, the ground, all those sorts of things. But yeah, all these things, when you see all these lists, even if you go back to the list, that we've made today, it really depends on what you're looking for in those sorts of things. I'm going to take another brief break here, and we'll be back in a moment, and I'm just going to read through a couple more questions and see if there's anything else there. Muku, can we have a break? Maybe Muku says no.
You're listening to Cricket's Conversation on 99.94. Whatever your team, we have the show for you on podcast, YouTube, or on the 99.94 app. We have India, England, South Africa, West Indies, and now Sri Lanka covered. If you want to find us, the best way is to follow us on social media at 9994DM by downloading the 9994 app or Google 99.94 on podcast. We speak cricket.
All right, welcome back. Almost went into Richie by accident there. All right, I've got about 5 more questions, and then I will go and prepare for tomorrow. Sports Breakdown says, thoughts on Craig Irvine's captaincy? Look, Craig Irvine's like 150 years old. I mean, he's got like Troy McClure's face at this point. He's seen so many different environments. He's lived through really an interesting time in Zimbabwe cricket. He's obviously played professionally around the world. And he's always come... I'm not saying he's a brilliant tactician, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but he is a sort of proper, I've seen it all, and let's not get too excited or too upset about this. So, yeah, I thought he captained really well in that particular game, but I'm not surprised that he did. It's almost like when you have Craig Irvine as your coach, it's almost as captain. I've spoiled my punchline there, but it's almost like having a coach on the field at that point because he's played just so much more cricket than anyone else. Dimitri says, if Cam Green comes into the side, is he really best suited to opening? Well, he's never made any runs in T20 cricket when he hasn't opened. So if he's not suited to opening, I'm not sure what he is. I saw Andrew McDonald said he can bat anywhere from 1 to 7. Having seen him play, and this is... So sometimes when I'm doing T20 analysis, especially when I'm working for teams and franchises, one thing that I'm trying to do is I'm actually trying to project what the player will be like based on having seen them, maybe their first class record, maybe even their list A record if I'm lucky. Having seen Cameron Green and having seen his record and the way he plays, I would say he's absolutely only at this stage in his career suited to opening. There's no doubt that as he develops as a player, he could bat anywhere from 1 to 7, and McDonald is right on that. But at the moment, I would say it would be a huge learning curve for him in the middle of a World Cup to do something that he's never done before in a position that he's not used to. If you stick him up the order, at the very least, you're putting everything in his favor. Now, that causes huge problems everywhere else in the team. And to be honest, I'm not even sure that they're going to bring him in. But if he does come in, I would say he would have to open. Sports Breakdown, again, should there be a separate chat for most runs, most wickets? So the reason that there isn't, right, is because the ICC don't want to admit that the first part of the tournament isn't a real tournament. So, like last time, we had all the Sri Lankans in the batting and the bowling list, and a couple of Scottish players as well. This time we're going to have probably a bunch of Zimbabweans and Max O'Dowd is probably high up in the batting list and all this sort of stuff, and it's ridiculous. I mean, but it all comes from the fact that we're living in a lie, and the ICC are pretending that other part of the tournament is legit, and it's quite obviously it's not. It's a requalifying event it's like half a requalifying event, isn't it? Because some of those teams haven't qualified, and some of them already have, which makes it even more annoying. Avanav says, "Do you think India can win the World Cup?" Yeah, of course. I don't know what their odds are for qualifying, but that'd be pretty high. They're certainly, I think they've certainly, Pakistan collapsing, South Africa losing points is huge for India, right? it completely opens up that group for them, and it turns what was a very hard group into a far easier group. Even if they do manage to lose to South Africa, they're still completely in, having already beaten Pakistan, in a really good position. So yes, I think from that point of view, and once you're in the semi-finals, anyone can win. Anyone can win because it's 2 knockout games. It's not like the IPL where the best teams no, anyone can win. So if you make the semi-finals, you're a 25% chance of winning. Well, you're between 20 and 25% chance of probably winning the whole thing, unless you get very unfavorable luck at a toss or a pitch or something like that, or the rain, I suppose, at this particular tournament. All right. Shaim says, "What do you think about the Netherlands running between the wickets? I thought they were brilliant. I can't give any time that I saw them as a really good running between the wickets team. I mean, Namibia have been really good. So I suppose that is they're one of the teams that really stood out for me. But yeah, Netherlands, again, they're a very disciplined team, a very professional team. Perhaps some of the older, with Roloff not batting as well. Scott Edwards is quite quick between the wickets. Baz the leaders are really, just a proper athlete. But yeah, so I think from that perspective, they're pretty good. But I haven't had them marked down as exceptional. So it's an interesting question. I'll try and watch them a bit closer in the next couple of games. And who's the best partner for Kohli to run in this side? Ooh, in this side, I don't know. I'm trying to think. It's one thing I've always wanted to do, like the best runners between wickets in the world list. And it's something I think me and Sid Monga have probably done, sitting in the press box during a rainy day before, but it's not something that I've done recently. But it's a really good question. So I don't have a brilliant answer for that, but really good questions there. What have we got here? AJ says, should I be, as an Indian fan, scared of the South African match on Sunday? Yeah. Yes, because South Africa is really good. I think they're better than they were in the last World Cup. I think Riley Rousseau coming in is huge for them, and he's been spectacular against India directly as well. So no, and that bowling lineup, that bowling lineup can make a mess of anyone. Bangladesh were chasing 200 the other day and whatever, but South Africa have the bowling to take a lot of wickets in a very short space of time. They also have a lot of guys who are hard to get away as well. So it's a really good combination. And they take a risk by having less batting in their lineup. And so they're looking for those sort of predictable 155 to 180 type scores, but then backing their bowlers to be able to do it. If they can get to that sort of score against India with their bowling, that gives them a huge chance, you would think. So yeah, definitely. So I've seen a lot of questions like this from HSP1. I don't know what you want me to say. Rain's shit and it ruins cricket. Rain happens. Melbourne's now at something like almost it was 2.5 times its daily rain before this today. It's monthly normal rain in October, and it's close to 3 times its normal rain, right? That is, that's like Shan Masood had a strike rate of 350 and, making 60 off 18 balls or something, right? Like, at a certain point, you just got to respect that the rain is having the best World Cup. Let's see if there's one more, and then we'll go. Anmol says, what chances do you feel an associate or non-test playing nation qualifying for the semis? Well, unfortunately, neither of those are associates. They're both test playing nations. So if they were to qualify for the semis, it'd just be more test playing nations again. Here's a good one. Stajit, I don't know how to pronounce that, says, when are we getting Pakistan Bean on 99.94? He should get his own podcast. We've got a couple more shows coming very soon on 99.94. Pakistan's a little bit further away than I would want it to be, but we've got some other great shows coming up. We've also got the Mitchell Johnson one, Edges and Sledges, if you're an Indian fan. You can find that one on YouTube, but also in the podcast feeds. And you got my ones, Red Inker and Double Century. And then we've got Australia, which just started, Sri Lanka, South Africa, England, India, West Indies. I think that's all of them. There's a lot of shows on 99.94 at the moment. So go to your local podcast provider and put in 9994 or 99.94 and see what comes up. It's probably going to be a lot. Anyway, thanks again to everyone. A bit of a weird day, but it was good to have a look back at this tournament. It's been a brilliant tournament so far, even though it's been too wet. But I will talk to you again tomorrow.